I went through all 32 NFL teams to figure out exactly how each coach affects your fantasy football team. Today's episode, the Atlanta Falcons. Take a seat, class is in session. First, we need to identify how this team has changed from last season. So, were there any coaching changes? The defensive coordinator changed over to Ryan Nielsen. His specialty is defensive lines. But based on what we're seeing on free agency here, they put a lot of equity into that position. And the only defensive line starter that they did lose was Abdullah Anderson over to the Commanders. There's going to be a lot of new pieces in this defense, and I think it's actually going to be a very fun one to watch. And the two lead roles that we saw Ryan Nielsen in, we didn't see them break out of the top 10 in allowed points per game. How do I weigh what exactly is a starter though in the NFL? Although it's just numeric here, I'm going with guys that started over 7 games in that time frame. But what's more interesting to us fantasy football nerds? The offense, right? This team is definitely more offensively minded in that of Arthur Smith and Dave Ragone. Arthur Smith is particularly known for his offensive line work and his work with tight ends. This is proven through his career with the Titans and now with the Atlanta Falcons. The Robin to his Batman here is David Ragone, who specializes in wide receivers and quarterbacks. This is emphasized in his time with the Tennessee Titans and the Chicago Bears. If you want to tell me whether they're great or bad, I'm just going off of numbers and what I'm seeing on the spreadsheet. The only real allocation that's quite interesting to me outside of the draft side, which I think everyone is excited about, is Taylor Heinicke and that of the backup quarterback. I think he's one of the more intriguing signings that they had in this offseason because that indicates to us that there is potentially a lack of interest in that of Desmond Ritter's overall development. And is something we really need to keep in mind ahead of this fantasy football season. We've laid the foundation for exactly how the Atlanta Falcons attack this offseason, but now we need to give it a little bit more structure. However, the guys upstairs projected for the Atlanta Falcons to finish this overall season. How many wins are the Atlanta Falcons expected to get? They're expected to get between 8 or 9 wins this season, but they look like they're going to fall short of that, primarily due to the lack of quality quarterback play. I'm going to agree with the consensus thought process of the guys upstairs here because at the end of the day, you need a strong quarterback to command this offense, but the offensive line does give me a lot of optimism. The Atlanta Falcons are currently projected to go second in the NFC South, and I think that's a little bit bold in their overall take there, but I can see with how easy of a division that is for them to be projected there. I'm personally going to lean more towards the third overall seed in the NFC South, but that's just me. You tell me in the comments where you have them landing. Now that we've got a really strong understanding of where the Atlanta Falcons are built towards this season, we can dive into exactly how Arthur Smith and Dave Ragone actually affect our overall fantasy football teams. So let's keep it in order. We're going to go quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, tight end. The QB totals for both Arthur Smith and Dave Ragone seem to be relatively in line, and it honestly fits pretty well with Desmond Ritter's already average. So pointing him in that 13 to 14 fantasy point range makes a lot of sense. And on top of that, it's not like this offense is going to be very pass heavy based on what we've seen with Bijan, who we're going to get it next. If you want to take a 8-round swing on Desmond Ridder, I think it's fine. I just personally would buy away from it because you have Taylor Heinicke, who got signed to a nice backup contract deal, and I wouldn't be surprised if he becomes the actual main starter halfway through the season, especially if they fall below the theoretical public's expectations. Now diving into the guy, Bijan Robinson. The best draft prospects in Saquon Barkley for the running back position. It's pretty blatant right there. And from everything that we've heard about Bijan, they want to make this offense entirely around him, whether that's putting him in the slot, running out of the backfield, or wherever you want to imagine. He's going to be there. Bijan Robinson is currently going as the RB3 in most drafts and is probably a little bit overpriced there. The only reason I say he's a little bit overpriced is because I think there are probably some better options that you're kind of overvaluing because of how much the training camp hype is going around him with the draft capital and so on. But based on the floor that he has, it does make a lot of sense as well. As we can see from the coaching trends here, we have the highs of highs in that 20 fantasy point area, and we also have kind of a median and flat area of that about 15 fantasy points. And I think we kind of cross-reference those with the base production that we did see with Tyler Algier when he played by himself and put Bijan comfortably in that 17 to 18 fantasy point range this season. That still puts him as a top 5 fantasy running back, but I believe that is a little bit overvalued in overall fantasy football drafts where he's currently going as the running back 3. But we also need to note that there hasn't been an RB1 rookie running back since Kareem Hunt. So for me right now, he's somebody I'm honestly going to stay away from in most fantasy football drafts, but when he IPOs on Prediction Strike, you know I'm going to be a buyer. Now looking at the RB2 here, we have Tyler Algier, who has a really nice uptrend between the two coaching staffs here of both Arthur Smith and Dave Ragone, where we can see a clear uptrend for the overall production. Because we have such an elite option in that of Bijan Robinson here, who we're going to continue to say is the most elite at running back prospects in Saquon Barkley, I think we'll likely see this dip as well. Unless if God forbid something happens to Bijan, Tyler Algier will not be really seeing the field much, if at all. So I wouldn't say he's a sell, but if he becomes somehow relevant, he's an elite handcuff option to have in this backfield. Now the wide receiver 1, that is Drake London. He's currently going as a wide receiver 23 in most drafts, and if you want to have a 14-point average for him, great, I can understand it, but I'm a little bit more pessimistic with that, even with Desmond Ridder as his quarterback, which he averaged about 14.5 fantasy points under. I think a 12 to 13 fantasy point range is far more realistic for him, in which he's a little bit pricey at his wide receiver 23 price tag. We also know that Bijan Robinson is going to be the center point of this overall offense, which means that we'll probably see a lack of wide receiver production, although we could be seeing some definite more big plays out of him. I mean, Drake London had an absolutely elite target share last year, but I'm not sure that's going to remain the same when they really want to emphasize this offense entirely around Bijan Robinson. And I think that's really important to kind of take into consideration when you look at the wide receiver 2 here and the wide receiver 3. But looking at the wide receiver 2 here, you have that of Mac Hollins. Looking at the charts, he's probably going to be projected about 8 to 9 fantasy points and is currently going undrafted in most fantasy drafts. He's also going to be a guy I'm personally staying away from because this looks like it's the beginning of a big downtrend. Same thing with the wide receiver 3 here. It looks like it's going to continue that downtrend as well and is going undrafted in most fantasy drafts. We also don't really know who that is going to be at this particular second time, as there's currently a little bit of a battle going on. By battle, I mean players fighting for that position. Now the one that's going to get me in a little bit of hot water here, and that is the tight end position. I do believe that Kyle Pitts is still overpriced. Kyle Pitts is currently going as the tight end 5 in most fantasy drafts, and I just can't get behind it. I think there's better options. I do think we will see him improve this particular season, but not enough to where I'm going, he's going to be my tight end 5 this year. I mean, if you really want to take a receiving option from this offense, go with Drake London. He clearly has the dominant target share. Kyle Pitts is one of the most elite tight end prospects of all time. I loved watching him at Florida. But we have 2 clear downtrends for both of the coaches. But considering the offensive coordinators have not changed from last season, I think it's more fair to put him in that 9 to 10 fantasy range where he did average last season. So is there a chance that we'll actually see him skyrocket up to 11 to 12? I hope so. He is somebody that should easily be able to have that floor. Realistically, I think Kyle Pitts could have a floor of like 14 to 15 if he was put in the right offense. I just don't think this is the offense for him to really become that guy. If you have any fantasy football questions, go ahead and drop them down in the comments below, and I'll do my best to answer them as quickly as possible. If you found this information rather helpful or insightful in any facet, go ahead and drop a like and subscribe. I'll be back tomorrow with a video on the Baltimore Ravens, so I know for a fact you're going to hear that because it's scary. But until next time, peace.